see no picture, so I guess that's.
You want to talk
So
about
he's
it?
trying to produce a new lady, huh?
Oh, I'm sure.
We went to
He
a
is
birthday
a-
party and he was with a lady.
He was with her?
All right, first of all, I want to thank you guys for coming today. Today's project, or topic we're going to be talking about will be choosing the correct paint for your project, knowing the difference between the types of paint that we're going to talk about today, oil-based paint and latex paint. Some of the reasons we're going to talk about that today has got to do, like we all know, the economy these days is not what it was. And a lot of the reasons this topic may interest you is if you're in the process of doing any kind of remodeling for your house, painting your house, redoing things. Judy, I know you are. You might want to know the differences between paint to choose the correct paint. I know we just put some doors in your house, and knowing the types of paint to use for those will cause those doors to last a lot longer, hopefully longer than your other ones did. And so today we're going to talk about those two types of paint, oil-based paints and latex paints. Some of the other reasons you might be interested in doing it, maybe through the spring, rains, and everything, you've got some leaks. I know in my house, and Kathy will agree with this totally, I have leaks in my house where some of my dormers have leaked, and I haven't got around to fixing them yet. Most of the time because I'm fixing everybody else's stuff. But those are some reasons. Peeling, you might have paint outside on your trim around your brick mold if you have a brick house. You have door trim around your doors and windows. Brick molding might be peeling, rotting, and those are some instances where you would want to know what kind of paint do I need to use for my project. So today we're going to talk about the different kinds of paint. Another thing for you to look at would be saving money on lower cost, not paying somebody else to do your work for you, doing it yourself. I know that's a foreign thing to a lot of people. But, you know, Judy likes to try some of her projects herself. Beth, I don't know how you are, but cost, and then again the satisfaction of just doing it yourself. And knowing that when you start a project, you finish it, you can stand back and look and say, you know, I did that myself. And there is a great deal of satisfaction. I know anytime I go in and do a project for somebody, and I start it from start to finish, then there is a great deal of satisfaction for me when I look at it and I see the finished product. And I know I did that. So, today we're going to talk about choosing the right paints. There is a difference between acrylic paint and latex paint. Oil-based paint, there is no difference between acrylic and latex, they are the same. Oil-based paint is an oil-based product. In other words, it's petroleum-based. And if you've ever painted with both, how many's done any painting on your own, with oil-based and with latex? So you vaguely know what we're talking about today. Kobe even knows. Okay. Today we want to talk about, in the past, you had two types of paint to choose from. You had oil-based, and then you had oil-based. There was only one kind of paint, really, but you had, you know, that was your choice. Today, with the recent advances in technology, as of probably about 20 years ago, you have an acrylic latex option, and there are different advantages to the acrylic latex. Today, first one we want to talk about is acrylic latex. The advantages to it, there are so many more advantages to acrylic latex than there are oil. One of them, it's easier, so much easier to paint with an acrylic latex than it is oil. It's breathable. It resists, in other words, it breathes, it expands. When you're in the temperature outside, and I know when you look at these walls, you can think, how does paint breathe? Well, paint does not absorb into a wall, it sits on a wall. And walls, doors, molding, hardwood floor, all that shifts with temperature. And when temperature causes variation in wood, moisture, every material that you use in building has some expandability. One of the great benefits to latex paint is it expands, it breathes, and it just lasts a lot longer. Not only that, it resists mildew. There are a lot of chemicals that go into paint. It's not just paint, but there's a lot of different components that make up paint. And a lot of the VOCs that they put in, the chemicals that they use, now today they can even put a mildew-resistant paint in those products. Most of those are going to cost pretty expensive to get that. Another advantage is the colors in an acrylic latex last so much longer than they do on an oil base. Oil base really just absorbs sun, any kind of light, and just the colors on an acrylic latex last a lot longer. They dry faster. If you've painted between the two, if you've done both paints, you know that when you paint oil base and you paint latex, oil base takes a whole lot longer time to dry. It's low odor. One of the biggest, I'd say, concerns when I talk to people about painting is, well, is this going to stink my house up? And the answer is, if you paint with oil base, yes, you're going to have some odor. With latex paints, one of the advantages is you have very little odor. But as with every paint, you want to use a little bit of ventilation. Latex paints are water cleanup. You clean up so much faster with water. It's less expensive. Latex paints are just, they're a lot easier to clean up. And some of the disadvantages, there are advantages and disadvantages as we talked about. Some of the disadvantages to latex is you can't go over an oil-based product. Today, a week ago, we installed doors in my friend's house. Okay, you cannot go over bare metal or metal or an outside surface unless you use a primer. But one of the disadvantages of latex is you can't go over oil base. So if you go into any house that has oil based trim on it right now, you can't go back over it with a latex paint. And I'll explain that in just a second. Latex paint doesn't flow as well as oil-based paint. When you look at oil-based paint on the wall or on door trim, casings in particular, it just seems like it's a seamless flow. The flow of it's just so much better, and with acrylic latex you seem to have brush marks. It's not as hard. Anybody that's painted with latex paints will tell you that it's more apt to be scuffed, scraped, bumped with vacuum cleaners, and it is not as hard as an oil-based paint is. Oil-based paint, when it dries, has like a hard shell. It just really forms an impenetrable bond. So when you bump it with something, it's more apt to stay there. With latex paint, you're tending to lose that quite as much. Now that you know the advantages and disadvantages of latex paint, we're going to move on to oil-based paint. Now many people, I go into their house and I want to paint, or they want to paint, I go in there and they want to use oil-based paint. I have some customers that I've used in the past, she would not let me do anything in her house as far as the trim unless it was an oil-based product. She liked all the advantages of it, and though there are so much fewer in advantages, the main advantages she liked were enough to convince her that she wanted to stick with it. I painted oil base on her materials for years, and that's the only thing she used, so therefore I could not go over her surface with a latex if I wanted to. I could, but it would be not cost effective. With going over top of an oil-based paint with an acrylic latex, you have to use a bonding primer. Same thing with bare metal, bare wood, anything you're doing outside with a deck, you want to use a good oil-based primer. Whether it's interior, exterior, anything raw, you want to use an oil-based primer. It penetrates. It doesn't just sit on top. It's not like acrylic latex. So some people just want to use that. They want to use the thing. There's no removal. If you have an older home, you want to remodel, you don't want to remove the paint, then use oil base. It has a tougher finish. We spoke about that a while ago. It dries almost like to a shell. And then a lot of the formulations in oil-based paint resist rust. As I talked about a while ago, if you have a metal fence, if you have bare metal cabinets, something like that you want to go over, oil-based has an anti-rust formula in it that keeps it from rusting. So that's one of the advantages. Well, some of the disadvantages to oil-based, obviously a while ago we talked about with acrylics, the low odor. On the other end of that scale, oil-based has a very strong odor whenever you paint with it. So not only do you have to deal with the oil, but the odor, you have a longer drying time, and you have messier cleanup. With oil-based paints, you not only have to use mineral spirits, some people call it paint thinner. It's very expensive. Running right now around $9 a gallon. So for roughly a third of what your cost of your oil-based paint is per gallon, you're going to spend that much again, another third, just on the cost of cleanup. So there are disadvantages to it. And the odor, the longer drying time, you might as well plan on, if you paint with oil-based paint, allowing at least 8 hours to dry. Now that you have a better understanding of the disadvantages of oil-based paints, let's look at some other considerations that you might want to think about when you're choosing between the two. I've been painting for probably roughly 25 years, and I've painted commercially, I've painted residential, and so I have opinions about paint, just like Kobe's been drumming for many years. He has opinions about which style of drums he wants to use for a particular song, or what apply, what kind of wood sticks, or drumming sticks. And just like Terry does service work, he has opinions about what works in the service bay and what doesn't work. And Charlie knows what works best in banking. But we all have opinions based on our experience. And the more experience you have, the more stronger your opinion is. I think you should always use a good primer. I spoke a while ago. No matter what it is, if you're painting on a wall, floor, door, whatever, key to doing a good job is providing that underlayment, that foundation. And you don't skimp on that foundation, because that, even though that's not the part that's going to be seen, that's the part that is actually holding up what is seen. It's a strong. I never use interior paint for exterior projects. That's probably in some people's mind a given, not to use that, but you would be shocked at how many places I go and how many jobs I see. Even today, every day in a job I do that's totally different than painting, I'm inspecting houses, and I get to look at exterior paint jobs. Then houses that are 1 year old, 2 years old, and the paint is peeling all off the door cases. And it's because they use the wrong material. And a lot of contractors they're a little shady. They'll use projects, or they'll use paint left over from others. They'll thin it down. I've seen it done. So that's one of the advantages of doing it yourself. You know that you're getting the full product. Acrylic latex is always recommended for outside, as long as you have the correct primer. 100% acrylic. The color lasts longer outside. It is flexible, as we spoke about a while ago. So when the sun hits it and that bond is there, it expands a little bit. As the temperature expands, some of you will look at your window, if your frames around your window, and you'll see a caulk line that's pulled away from the brick. Well, that caulking, even though we're not talking about caulking, that caulking is not flexible like paint is. And therefore, when the windows expanded and they contract, the caulking pulled away from the brick. And therefore, you want to invest in a good, high-priced, not necessarily high-priced, but there are good products that you caulk with that are flexible, they're expandable. Same thing with paint. Outside, using acrylic latex paint with a good oil-based primer. Cheap's not always better. You want to use oil-based paint on raw wood. We talked about that. Bare metal. And comparing the two of them, I guess if I had to do a comparison between oil and water, and trying to use one with the other, and vice versa, it's kind of like mixing oil and water. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but if you take a glass of water and you put a few drips of oil in it, Terry, you know that you're in the automotive industry. They don't mix, do they? I mean, what happens when you put oil in water? It peels, it shrinks away. They don't bond together, they shed from each other. It's the same principle applies in painting. That's why you don't use an oil base with a latex. You can use vice versa as long as you use an oil-based primer. So now that we've explored the two types of paint, and you have a do-it-yourself project that you want to do, You know, we've looked at the pros and cons of each one, the disadvantages and advantages of oil-based versus latex. And now that you know that, I hope you have a better understanding of the two types of paint and the one that you'll make the choice to do your next project with. And that's the end of my presentation.